Welcome to the Commons, a library and archive UI in Geneva, and to the journey to the Summit of the Future. Today, we're speaking with Undersecretary General Guy Ryder, who's the head of policy in the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations in New York. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to our journey to the Summit of the Future. Actually, you're in Geneva to offer an executive briefing about the status of preparations of the Summit of the Future, coming up in September 2024.
That's right.
In New York. So can you briefly share with us and our audience about the preparations for the summit?
Sure, thanks very much. Well, in fact, we're quite well advanced along the road to the Summit of the Future. It's a story which begins when our member states adopted a declaration on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, where they took a number of commitments about the future of multilateralism, and then asked our Secretary General to present his ideas about how we could realize these commitments. And that led the Secretary General to present his report. It's quite a well-known report, Our Common Agenda. And from that, the idea of the Summit of the Future emerged. And since then, we've been working on the preparation. So what concretely has been done? Well, we have a decision formally to have the summit in September of next year, as you indicated. And we also have presented a number of ideas about the substance that the summit would look at. The Secretary General has published a series of policy briefs, and they're really well worth looking at. They're short documents, they're on the web, and they give an idea of the Secretary General's thinking about the types of issues that the summit should look at. We've had a ministerial preparatory meeting. The ministers have met, 120 of them. They've given us their views on the summit. The President of the General Assembly has appointed co-facilitators to lead negotiations up until next September. The co-facilitators are the governments of Germany and Namibia. So we think we're in pretty good shape. What happens now is that the intergovernmental negotiations begin. From November now, the month we are in, there will be informal consultations in New York, and I think we'll see a zero draft of the outcome at the beginning of next year, and then we're into the real intergovernmental process. And of course, member states run this process, they decide. But it's really important, I want to stress this, that multi-stakeholders are involved. We really want to make this a very open, collaborative process. Decisions by governments need to be informed, and I would say improved and enriched by the views of the multiple stakeholders who have an interest in the Summit of the Future.
And indeed, these negotiations will be long, they're complex because they're multi-stakeholder. We have seen how that works when was the time of negotiating, to use that word, the post-2015 development agenda, known today as the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. There was the same approach to inclusive multi-stakeholder dialogue was used to a large degree of success, I might say, because the agenda itself is a very revolutionary document in the history of multilateralism. Yeah. So what are you saying is the same process is being used this time?
Yeah. Absolutely. And in fact, already the road that we have traveled up until now has benefited from very wide multi-stakeholder involvement. I myself have met with youth groups, with private sector groups, really everybody who has a stake in the issues. So this intergovernmental process will be informed and embedded in this broader process of consultation. It's very important.
While this process of negotiation is ongoing, can we assume or share with the audience a little bit what is the expected outcome of the summit and how it will be meaningful for citizens of the world?
Yeah. Well, the formal answer is that the scope of the summit has already been the subject of a General Assembly decision. On the 1st of September, the General Assembly said that the summit should adopt a pact for the future. So a pact will be adopted. And not only that, they've also said the 5 chapters that will make up this pact. So let me tell you what those 5 chapters are. The first one is, you won't be surprised, sustainable development and financing of sustainable development. The finance issue is very, very important. The second is peace and security, The Secretary General in his policy briefs is suggesting a new agenda for peace. There was an original agenda for peace back in 1992, but conflict and insecurity has developed in very new ways, and the Secretary General is convinced we need a new agenda for peace, both to renew our own activities and also to address the emerging issues in conflict. For example, new technologies being used in conflict, non-state actors. Life has become very, very complicated in the peace and security agenda. So that's the second chapter. The third chapter is based around technology, science, technology, innovation, and digital cooperation. The idea here is to adopt a global digital compact, be annexed to the major pact of the Summit of the Future, which will try to set out how we're going to work together to make sure that new technologies, think artificial intelligence today in particular, how they're going to be harnessed to maximize the benefits for humanity, equally shared, and also to deal with the negatives, these harms that we're constantly aware could creep in. The fourth chapter, I think it's not the least important one, and it's important, is that member states have decided that youth and future generations should be the subject of a very dedicated part of the pact. We will have, we hope, a declaration on future generations. This is the idea that the decisions we take today should of course address today's problems, but they should also take cognizance of the rights and the interests of generations who are not yet born. So a declaration on future generations will be annexed to the pact, and an accent and a real focus on young people, on youth. And here the focus is on how to make sure that youth have the right opportunities to participate in UN activities. We've tried a lot in this regard, and there's been a lot of initiatives, but I think the view is that we need still to make a step change in youth involvement. So that will be another chapter of the pact. And the last chapter, the fifth one, is about transforming global governance. How the mechanisms that we have need to be amended, strengthened, changed, so that we can make all of these ambitions for the future actually realized. And you can imagine how complex this is. I mean, if you think about Security Council reform as one particularly contentious area, you can see that we have a lot on our plate. And just one last thing about the results, the outcome of this summit. Human rights and gender, empowering women and girls, has been identified as a cross-cutting theme that should be present in each of these different chapters. Not a chapter in itself, but a red thread that should run through the whole of the pact. Now you've asked a more difficult question. That's what we have decided. What difference is this going to make? Well, we're in a world faced with extraordinary challenges and problems. We see conflict in the world. We're struggling to manage artificial intelligence. It's a reasonable question for people to say, what difference is this summit going to make? Is this a distraction, or is it really a solution to some of the questions? And I think here the answer is very, very clear. This is a summit that will address issues that matter to people. How we can make the international financial system work properly so that the needs of the Sustainable Development Goals are met. The Secretary General has been very outspoken in saying that as the financial system operates today, it's unfit for purpose. It's not delivering for people. So we need to connect the enormous financial resources at our disposal to people's needs, to change their lives. Secondly, technology. It's the same story. We need to make sure that these extraordinary technologies, with their transformative potential, are actually used to better the lives of everybody. And by the way, one of the big pieces in the technology chapter will be about how to close the digital divide. There's still too many people who have no connectivity, no access to technologies. And with artificial intelligence, the digital divide can be an artificial intelligence chasm. We must stop that from happening. And I don't think I need to emphasize just how important the peace and security agenda is. If we look at the newspapers, we look at the internet today, we know that regrettably, safe living conditions, peace is actually just an aspiration for very, very many people in the world. we have to act on that. We have to address those things. So the point I'm trying to make is these are issues that matter to people. And if the summit is a success, we will take decisions which will enable the multilateral system to address those needs more effectively than we're doing today.
So going back to chapter 4 for a second, the involvement of youth.
Yeah.
It is my experience, and in the UN, there is a lot of aged people talking about youth. That happens a lot. So what is meaningful involvement of youth, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, as one of those aged people who does a lot of talking about youth, this is a very important question. And you've used the word which I think is most important, meaningful. Because if I go to, if I'm in the UN, I see a lot of young people coming to meetings. I see a lot of young people who have access to our processes. But they themselves are saying, okay, we get invited, we're very pleased, we're happy, maybe we get a chance at the microphone, but what is the consequence? What does it bring? What does it mean? And I think the notion of making this participation truly meaningful is the idea of this part of the Pact for the Future. And here the Secretary General again has put forward, I think, extremely ambitious and far-reaching proposals. He wants to make youth engagement and youth participation not an option or something which happens here or there in the UN system. He wants to make it a cross-cutting and obligatory institutionalized part of UN processes. And there's a number of points about that. He also wants to ask member states to step up. He wants to see that UN engagement is grounded in national level processes and engagement. I mean, it's quite difficult to imagine young people coming from member states if there is a vacuum of youth engagement in those member states. We need to root UN youth engagement in national processes. So he's setting out a number of principles that should guide youth engagement processes. They should be adequately resourced, they should be institutionalized, they should recognize the diversity of young people. They're not all the same after all. And of course, this should be done in a situation of independence so that young people can speak their mind without inhibition. It's a big agenda, it's a complex one, but if we can pull this off, I think we can set standards for youth engagement, which can be taken up by member states and then used, if you like, as a solid platform for the things we want to build in the UN. It's really important.
If I hear you correctly, concerning youth, there are two complementary aspects. One is to involve global youth, young citizens, in the processes that the UN is launching within the framework of the Summit of the Future, but possibly also other frameworks, peace and security, technology, all those that you mentioned. And the other aspect is to work for generations that aren't born yet.
Exactly.
So this kind of, how can member states do good in this area? What is that member states can do? After all, the United Nations is an organization driven by member states' will or lack thereof, depending on the situation. And so what could they do, our members, to bring this to fruition and reality?
You make a really important point. Our member states have decided to put youth and future generations in the same part of the pact. But the truth is there are separate issues involved. So we have nearly 2 billion young people in the world today, 1.9 billion. We need to touch them. The people who are there and whose voice needs to be heard and needs to have consequences for the decisions we take. So that's one set of issues. And of course, substantively, young people have particular issues, mental health, employment, all sorts of things. That's our young people today. But there's a further 10 billion young people who are not born yet. They will be born before the end of our century. They're not there. How can they be represented? But the point here is that we need to take decisions today factoring in the interests and the rights of these as yet unborn generations. And the proposals of the Secretary General here are pretty clear. We need to adopt a declaration, a UN declaration on future generations. The interesting thing here is very many member states put in their constitution or in other instruments commitments in respect to future generations. They exist. We need to collect them. We need to collect them and reflect them in an international instrument. He also wants to appoint a special envoy on future generations. And another proposal is to set up an intergovernmental forum to discuss how decisions today impact on future generations. The one we always think of is climate action, isn't it? So if we screw up the planet today, we're actually going to destroy the prospects of future generations. And that's the most obvious issue. But there are many others. Think about intergenerational inequality. If we don't deal with inequality today, and we're not, it's getting worse, we're going to entrench inequalities for future generations, because all of the evidence shows that inequality goes from one generation to the next to the next. So we've got to look quite broadly at these issues.
Chapter 5, multilateralism and the possibility that it transforms. So there has been discussion on this dichotomy between the future of multilateralism, meaning the future of the multilateralism we have, and the multilateralism of the future, meaning the multilateralism that we need fit for purpose. You use that expression. That we need to face global problems that weren't exactly there when we designed these current mix of multilateral institutions and methodologies. So how will the summit of the future contribute to explore and perhaps discover the potential for self-transformation, or what we call today multilateralism?
Let me give you a reflection to try to answer your question, which comes from this preparatory ministerial meeting which took place on the 21st of September. 120 ministers or other participants. What was the key messages? I got a couple of key messages from this open-ended discussion. They weren't taking decisions. The strongest message was we absolutely need multilateralism. We cannot conceive of a future, of a world which is safe and prosperous, all those things we want for it, which is not accompanied by effective multilateralism. So that's the first point. Almost unanimous, I would say unanimous, recommitment to multilateralism. But second comment is, yeah, we need multilateralism, but not quite the multilateralism we have today. It needs to be better. It needs to be more effective. And in his Our Common Agenda report, the Secretary General talks about inclusive, effective, and networked multilateralism. This is what he wants to make happen. These are his buzzwords. So part of that inevitably relates to this last chapter in the Pact for the Future, which is transforming governance. Now, a lot of attention is going to be given to Security Council reform because it is, as you know, on everybody's lips and not everybody agrees upon it. I doubt we're going at the summit to get a reform of the Security Council, but we need to move forward. But there are other areas as well. So we need to look at this governance of digital cooperation. So we want to set up a global digital forum in New York. We need to look at artificial intelligence. The Secretary General's just set up a high-level advisory board on the governance of artificial intelligence. We need to look at this new agenda for peace. And looking forward, we're also proposing some quite far-reaching measures, for the safe use of outer space. This might seem very, very far away from our everyday concerns, but those who are specialized in outer space say we're at a moment of inflection. We're where civil aviation was in the 1970s. More and more objects are being launched into space. Issues of managing space traffic, space debris, how to use extracelestial resources, and above all, how to prevent an arms race in outer space. This isn't science fiction. This is not tomorrow's news. It's things we have to look at today. So the more you look at these issues, you think, wow, we have a lot of issues on the table, but the ambition is the right ambition. The way I think of it is we cannot realistically be less ambitious. We have to operate at this level of ambition.
Under Secretary General Ryder, you came to Geneva today to address an executive briefing to the diplomatic corps at large. It's going to take place tomorrow. But as we wrap up this episode, to our own global audience, what is the message you want to leave with them today?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, of course, I have come to Geneva to talk to the diplomatic corps here, to talk to government representatives, our member states, who will in the end negotiate this pact for the future. But as I tried to say at the beginning of this conversation, we need the involvement not just of our member states and governments, we need the engagement of all of the multi-stakeholders and all of you who may be listening and interested in this conversation. We're engaging with academia, we're engaging with the private sector, we're engaging with youth, we're engaging with women's activists. All of this is absolutely fundamental to making this summit a success. The way I look at it is, if we have this ambition of a summit which touches people's lives, which improves people's lives, which has real relevance and offers new perspectives for people around the world, that won't be done without those people. Those people have to be part of the action. You have to be actors in designing this summit and making sure that the decisions that are finally taken truly identify and address the issues which matter to you, which matter to people around the world, and particularly because part of the aim here is to accelerate delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals, those who are furthest behind. This is an agenda as well for social justice and peace and security, better lives for us all.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.